sort of more traditional running races, but you stop and catch a fish during the run. So a good example, we have one this coming weekend down on the Vermejo Park Ranch in northern New Mexico, and it's a 10-mile loop essentially. And at some point you got to stop and catch a fish, and then your time is adjusted by the size.
Hey friends, welcome to the Adventure Sports Podcast. The episode today is on a subject that we haven't covered as much as others, but there are some old episodes, if you dig way back, on fly fishing. But not just fly fishing. This is fly fishing with a twist. It's also distance running and long distance running and fly fishing at the same time. Probably you've not heard of this. Our guest is Andrew Todd, and Andrew is the founder and the executive director of a nonprofit 501c3 called Running Rivers. And anyway, Andrew, welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks for having me, Kurt.
Oh, you bet. This is going to be a lot of fun. We were talking before I hit record here, and we almost got carried away. You know, I'm going to preface it this way. If you think of fishing as watching a bobber in a lake or in a pond, then that's probably not what this show is going to be about today. We're going to talk about primarily fly fishing, but doing so in a very athletic way. And I have to say, avid fly fishermen and women are pretty incredible athletes. The ability to stand in strong currents on slippery rocks and to work a river when the water's trying to knock you over, you know, and you do that hour after hour after hour, it's actually a very athletic endeavor. And fly fishing is a totally different sport than just watching a bobber. So, Andrew, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I've always maintained that becoming a good wader involves learning how to fall gracefully, and you just over time you figure out where to put your feet and where not to put your feet. But yeah, and in some cases, crossing big rivers or positioning yourself where you can get at fish, you're fighting current, and your legs can be pretty beat at the end of a long traditional fly fishing day. We don't do a whole lot of wader fishing in what I've created with the Flyathlon through Running Rivers, but it's fly fishing is more athletic on its face than most people think.
Well, I want to get back to the Flyathlon. That's what I referred to earlier, but we're going to spend some time on that, because that's a lot of what Running Rivers is all about. But I would like to rewind a little bit. Where are you these days? Where are we talking to you from?
I am at my cabin in West Cliff, Colorado, which many people probably don't know where that is. You might have driven through it. It's between the Sangre de Cristo Mountains on the west and the Wet Mountains on the east in south central Colorado, sort of south of Colorado Springs. And we've had this cabin for about 7 years, and it gives me close and I'd say quick, but the Sangre de Cristos are pretty steep and gnarly, so it's close access to some great high mountain lake fishing and great trail running. So that's what drew me to it. I came here as a kid, and when time came to get out of Denver or find a place out of Denver, I said to my wife, "How about West Cliff?" And she said, "What the hell is West Cliff?" And I said, "Let's go see it." And we've been here for about 7 years. So,
well, like I mentioned, my brother-in-law and his wife are in West Cliff as well. They recently bought a place up there, and it is an amazing location. It really is. The Sangre de Cristos are probably the most precipitous, jagged peaks, the range of peaks in Colorado. And several 14ers mixed in there with some of the roughest four-wheel drive roads that you'll ever experience. But it's such a beautiful, beautiful location.
Yeah, they're pretty narrow if you look at them on a map. I think in parts you could get across from one valley over to the San Luis Valley in, I think it's 15 miles in some of the narrower parts, but it gains 5,000-6,000 feet in that narrow stretch. So when you go up to these lakes, it's a lot of straight up.
That's the right word for it. I've climbed several of the 14ers there. And some of them, you get to the top, and I usually have climbed from the west side, although some I've done from the east as well. But you get from the top, and you're looking down to the other side of the range. It's like there's one mountain, and in some
Oh yeah,
places it's two mountains thick. But in a lot of places, it's kind of like one mountain thick between plains.
yeah,
So very unique range
yeah.
and extraordinarily
It's
beautiful.
and it's the Rainbow Trail, which is sort of in our backyard up here to the west, runs from Poncha Springs about 100 miles down on the east side of the Sangre de Cristos to Great Sand Dunes. You can get to Medno Lake, which is the the Medno Creek is the creek that goes in front of the sand dunes, and so there's a 100-mile trail that runs the east side of the Sangres. So it's about the Sangres continue south of that, but there's a lot of recreation on at least on the east side of the Sangres that gets up in there.
Yeah, it's a very, very unique place in the world, not just Colorado, but in the world. It's a very unique place. So that's a
Right.
fun setting,
We-
especially for doing what you do. So we're talking about fly fishing and trail running. And most people think of those as completely separate sports, but you've managed to combine them. So explain how this works.
Well, so we've got a number of. I view it more as an ecosystem, the flyathlon ecosystem. So the flyathlon races themselves are sort of more traditional running races, but you stop and catch a fish during the run. So a good example, we have one this coming weekend down on the Vermejo Park Ranch in northern New Mexico, and it's a 10-mile loop essentially. And at some point, you got to stop and catch a fish, and then your time is adjusted by the size of fish and sometimes species, but in this case, it's all native Rio Grande cutthroat trout on the ranch, so species doesn't factor in. But you can have someone finish quickly, and then another person comes across with a bigger fish, and the latter person can win because of the time adjustment based on the fish. And so there's a lot of panic at the finish line, people wondering who's coming in after them, like what'd you catch and all that. And with those with the flyathlon races, it's a lot of fun, but the purpose is to raise money and awareness about native fish. And so we use a crowdfunding model to raise money with the races for native trout conservation through partnerships with our organization, Running Rivers, and state and federal agencies, as well as other nonprofits. And over the course of the 10 years we've been doing this, I know the Adventure Sports Podcast is also 11 years old. This is our 11th year. We've raised just short of $1 million with this flyathlon model for projects benefiting
Wow.
cutthroat trout. So not just cutthroat trout. We have races in the east too, where it would be brook trout. But that's the flyathlon race, and then we have variations on that, which I'm sure we'll talk about the longer distances. But the flyathlon races are usually 10 to 13 miles or under, so they're not super epic distances.
Okay, so I'm envisioning a bunch of people running with fly rods in hand and trying to find the perfect pool to score a really quick big fish. Now, it's
Yep.
catch and release, right? So how do you verify the length?
We've had variations on that. It started out with a piece of Right in the Rain paper that we printed a ruler on. We had people take a fish picture on that piece of paper. With keep fish wet techniques, you want to keep fish in the water as long as possible, and putting them on a piece of paper, someone astutely pointed out, is not the best way to maintain the health of the fish. And so we've migrated we've got a ruler right now that you can put under the water. And at the finish line, we do a lot of photo interpretation to estimate how long a fish is. So we always say, put it on something we can measure later, which obviously leads to many fourth grade jokes, but still we're able to estimate. But invariably, there's an argument over both, the biggest fish and the smallest fish, because we award prizes for both of those, regardless of where you finished in the order. You can win for either the biggest or smallest fish, and then that puts you in the final competition for the overall winner. So you could be a minute before the final cutoff with the smallest fish and still win the whole thing. So we're trying to be as inclusive of all abilities and interests as possible.
You know what? I'm getting a vibe here that this is one part tomfoolery, a huge part
Several
conservation,
parts, yes.
and a lot of fun. People getting together to just have a good time and to celebrate the things that they love. Celebrate running and fly fishing. Why not? Oh, and beer.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. So my perspective is conservation is something that the average person isn't thinking about all the time. But if you make it fun, they're more likely to have that message resonate with them and have that incorporated into what they believe. If they come out in the woods with us and have an awesome time and get educated about conservation of native fish, then they might make that a part of who they are. And so fun is a huge part of everything I try to do in life, but certainly with this organization.
I believe that fun is a very amazing motivator. And so if you want something to succeed, it should be fun. I mean, whatever we do in life should be rewarding enough that we want to do it, right? And fun is one of those rewards. Yeah.
Absolutely. There's way too much garbage out in the world to not try to find and create fun at every at every opportunity. That's how I feel.
Oh, that's really, really cool. Well, tell us about the races that you have coming up this season so that people know kind of describe what they're like, what the landscape is like, what the river is like, what you're fishing for, that sort of thing.
Sure. Yeah, it's kind of all over the map. So the first race we had this year was back at the end of May. That's a relay version of the Flyathlon called Nascarp. Your listeners won't be able to see it, but I've got a Nascarp hat on,
There you go.
which is a relay. So if you and I are a team, we would alternate running laps, and a lap consists of about a mile and a half. You've got 20 minutes to catch a fish, or you get a 15-minute penalty, and
Oh,
then you have to drink a beer or a non-alcoholic alternative, because we have unleaded and leaded divisions in NASCAR. Um, but as soon as you finish your beer or non-alcoholic alternative, that releases me, and then I do a lap, and then we alternate until we've finished our six pack. And that's called NASCARP. We do that outside of Denver at a state park called Staunton State Park. And
yeah.
we're not catching carp; we're catching stocked rainbow trout. But that was a lot of fun. I think we raised about $15,000 with that race. This coming weekend, we have a race on the Vermejo Park Ranch in northern New Mexico. Ted Turner's ranch. The biologist for Turner heard about it through a meeting I attend every year for the Rio Grande Cutthroat Trout Conservation Team. And they said our ranch would be a great place to do this. This ranch has, in the watershed we'll be in, it's 100% native Rio Grande cutthroat trout. So it's a real opportunity for education and also an opportunity for our fly athletes to catch a Rio Grande cutthroat trout. So if they catch a fish, they've caught a Rio Grande cutthroat trout at this race.
Wow. So let's talk a little bit about that because,
Sure.
I mean, cutties are threatened in a lot of places, but the Rio Grande cutthroat, that's unique to that rivershed, right?
Yeah, so it's the San Luis Valley in Colorado, and then much of northern New Mexico
Okay.
is where the Rio Grande cutthroat trout is endemic to. And they were actually a candidate for the endangered species list, but because of the work that all these agencies that we partner with have done over the years, it was recently removed as a candidate species, and it rides that line, right? So you can't get complacent and
Right.
say, oh, we're off the list. It's a free for all. So, but it was an exciting development to have it taken off the list. But it's still a very unique and rare fish to catch unless unless you're in the right places.
Yeah, catching native cutties is kind of a special experience because they're a lot harder to find than what you're going to find in your average lake or river somewhere. And they're not something that was put in here. They're the fish that lived here from the beginning. And they've had a lot of competition from various species that have been introduced over the years. And so I think people need to understand cutties are pretty special here in Colorado.
Kurt, I'm going to have you come to one of my races and talk to people about the value of cutthroat trout, because that's the exact message we're trying to get out there. Is most of these, at least in Colorado, the subspecies of cutthroat trout are in a small percentage of their historic distribution, and we're not saying that cutthroat trout need to replace all trout on the landscape wherever they are. What we're saying, and how I feel, and my personal mission as well as my professional mission, is to make sure that these fish are around for my kids. Obviously, they're here for
Yeah.
my kids, but for my grandkids, and getting beyond the 10 to 15% of historic range, and maybe up to the 30 or 40% of historic range, I'd feel a lot more comfortable with things like climate change and all the other human-caused impacts that some of these watersheds feel. For it to be in that higher percentage, I'd feel much better about their chances into the future.
Yeah, that's a good point. People worry about a lot of environmental concerns, and I think that sometimes folks are surprised when they hear about fish. It's one that we often don't think about. But the fish have certainly been heavily impacted by human activity, and even in the oceans. I mean, the natural fisheries in the oceans are one of the most tragic stories of human impact on natural ecosystems. But that's also true for native fish all across the United States. And a lot of that had to do, of course, with water quality, being changed. But then a lot of it had to do with some, in retrospect, maybe misguided ideas about introducing sport fish into areas that, weren't really. I guess the native fish couldn't easily compete with the sport fish that were introduced.
Yeah, and both of those are a big reason why they're in the low percentage of historic that they were that they had been in. I think one of the newer threats is climate change, particularly for trout species, because trout operate within a very narrow temperature window, and
Sure.
as it warms, we're pushing parts of the watersheds above that threshold that they can safely survive and reproduce in. And unlike birds or mammals, fish can't pick up and move out of the watershed that they're in. They could go downstream, but usually it gets warmer as they go downstream, so they're kind of stuck where they are on the landscape. And so that makes climate change a unique challenge for freshwater fish. And so that's where human reintroduction comes in, and that's a big part of what states are doing to make sure that this fish is on the landscape into the future, or these fish, not just the Rio Grande cutthroat trout. There's a number of subspecies of cutthroat trout that are in jeopardy moving forward.
You can fill in what I don't know about this, but in our area, there are places where they're trying to protect the cutthroat population. And one of the ways they've done that is by putting a barrier across the stream that water has to pour over that keeps the fish downstream from being able to swim upstream past the barrier. So that way, rainbows and browns and brookies that may have been introduced can't get into the native water above that pour over. Um, am I using any of the correct terminology there?
Yeah, no, you're using all the right words. The reason behind the barrier is that unfortunately these fish need to be isolated from brook trout, brown trout, rainbow trout. Brook trout and brown trout will outcompete the cutthroat trout, in part because brook trout and brown trout are fall spawners. So when they emerge from the gravel, they're a little bit bigger, and so they'll outcompete the small cutthroat over time, and you'll lose those cutthroat, and they'll get pushed out eventually. And in most scenarios, rainbow trout are a bit of a different threat in that they can actively interbreed. I'm sure you've heard the name cutbow, which is a cutthroat rainbow trout hybrid, which
Right.
then you're over time you're going to eliminate that unique species of cutthroat trout through hybridization. And so the barrier is an important tool in the interior West to native fish conservation. Sometimes it butts up against the other parts of the country where barriers are bad, and barriers in general, they limit movement of fish within a watershed,
Right.
and so
Sure.
you can get very isolated pieces. But like the Pacific Northwest, where there's been all this argument over dam removal, here we are either creating or identifying barriers to put fish above in the interior West, and so it's a little nuance, the messaging around native fish conservation, depending on where you are in the country.
Wow. Very interesting. Okay, here's a related question. I want to know your opinion.
Sure.
I've backpacked in a lot of places where there are a series of massive waterfalls to get up to the high mountain lake where the cutties live.
Mm-hmm.
And in looking at that, those are natural barriers. The fish had to get there somehow. And that is the question. Everyone likes to sit around the campfire and say, how did they get there in the first place? You know what I'm saying? So what's
yeah,
your theory about that?
it's not what on my shirt here. There's an osprey holding a trout. I don't think we had osprey with reproductive age fish in either claw and dropped them into a lake. I think there were a lot of historically fishless upper watersheds and lakes that these fish were put into for the right reasons, and that they wanted to conserve this population or that population. But way back in the day, a lot of those lakes were stocked with non-natives, and so whatever ecosystem was there before was impacted by the fish being present. And so it's a conversation that fisheries biologists have as they're contemplating where we're going to put the native fish to ensure its persistence into the future, given a warming planet. And so while many of these areas may have been historically fishless, I think because fish have been there for so long, now they're viewed as an opportunity to put the native fish in there. But there is a discussion around that. Should we be removing all fish and allow many of these watersheds that would have been historically fishless to go back to being fishless? And I'm not sure how I land on that. I think I'm enough of a cutthroat fan that I'd like to see them remain on the planet instead of just having fishless ecosystems, because that would have been a lot of ecosystems, and all the main river habitat below that now has browns, brooks, and rainbow trout in it. It would be logistically very challenging to reclaim that for native fish, given the public-private land interface and all the people you would have to convince of that. So these high mountain watersheds are often the lower hanging fruit for reclamation and the habitat that's going to be cool enough into the future.
Interesting. Yeah, that's fascinating for me. I want to mention to the listeners out there, we hear a lot about climate change and global warming, and we don't hear as much, like I mentioned earlier, about things like how fish are being impacted by human activity. And it's not just the fish, though. And I bet you can speak to this, but I view water as the lifeblood of the planet. And if you look at rewind. If you go to the doctor and you say, I don't feel well, they're going to take a blood sample to try to figure out what's going on, right? Because they can see what's going on by looking at your blood. The same thing is true for an ecosystem. You can look at the water and the species in the water, and you can know what the health is for that ecosystem. And that's why I think that water is more like the lifeblood of the planet. And if you want to know how an ecosystem is doing, in my mind, it's largely about the water. So Andrew, can you fill us in a little bit on how important that is, and how natural water systems are being threatened?
Yeah, I think we're in Colorado in particular. We're in a great situation where so much of the water that we get in our urban areas is coming from these high mountain watersheds. We're called a headwater state. So um, a lot of the water that we're consuming is coming from our mountains versus our neighboring states, where it's gone through cities at least
Yeah.
once, and so the water quality is very high here in Colorado, and I think it's important to protect that, and that's by developing watershed plans, limiting development in those watersheds to prevent it from either being, the water timing being changed or the quality coming out of the mountains being changed. But with a changing climate, we are seeing changes in snowpack, changes in melting out of the snowpack. So the predictability of getting that water, particularly as we grow as communities, we're finding that we don't always have water, the right amount of water when we need it. And so there's all sorts of challenges moving forward, not just for the ecosystems, but how we're going to meet water demand in a future where water may be declining with climate change. The precipitation is more variable and less predictable than the temperatures increasing. But if you look at like the Colorado River over the last 50 years, there's been a significant decline in the volume of water that's coming down the Colorado River, and that's for a lot of reasons. But that's the subject of heated conversations right now between all the states that depend on that water quantity, not quality even. So I think we've got a lot of, particularly in the West, we've got a lot of difficult times ahead in terms of water quantity and water quality for that matter.
Interesting. So what you're doing with your organization, Running Rivers, is shining a light on all of this. You're letting the world
Yeah,
know this stuff matters.
with a focus on the ecosystem part of it and the native fish part of it. But yeah, getting 70 people in the woods is an opportunity to educate. And when you've got a beer in your hand, I think you're more easily educated, and you may forget it, but if you keep coming back to the races, and over time you'll hear it all again, and you'll be like, hey, I think I've heard this before.
Well, you described the race in New Mexico, but I think we haven't heard about the others yet.
Yeah, so there's two more in Colorado that we're doing this year, and two others that are taking a year off for a number of reasons. We have the Middle Creek Flyathlon, which is at the beginning of August. That's the longest running one. This will be the 11th year of that. That's in the San Luis Valley, so also benefiting Rio Grande cutthroat trout. And then in September, we have the Lake Fork Flyathlon, which is on the Lake Fork of the Gunnison River near Gunnison, Colorado. And that drainage is Colorado River cutthroat trout. So the money we raise with that race goes towards projects benefiting Colorado River cutthroat trout. And the two I mentioned that are taking a year off, we have a race in Iowa that benefits brook trout, and a race in North Carolina that also benefits brook trout. And the flooding in North Carolina from last summer is the reason why that one's taking a year off. And then the race in Iowa is taking a pause because the guy who helps, well, he and his friends organize it out there. He's got young kids, and he's like, "This is a lot of work putting one of these
Needs a
on, and
break.
I need to push pause this year." So
Yeah.
after a lot of yelling, I said, "Okay, you can take a break." But no, it's always been sort of, all these races have been organic, and they're in their initiation. And so when he wanted to take a break, I said, definitely, but come back for sure because it's a ton of fun.
Oh, that really is fun. What a unique idea. So, how does the scoring work? The larger the fish, the more time comes off your card. Is that right? Is it by inch?
Yeah,
Is it an
so
inch a minute or inch a
it is.
10 minutes or?
So usually I'll fish the creek the day before or a couple days before and see how easy it is to catch fish, and
Yeah.
then make that call. It's very scientific. I'm like, wow, that was really hard. It should be 4 minutes per inch this year versus last, and so yeah, that's the magic behind where we set the set the fish bonus. But like in the Lake Fork of the Gunnison race, we have a big fish bonus where if you've got a fish over 15 inches, the those additional inches are worth more off your time because the size of the fish should matter. Otherwise, it's
Right.
just about how fast you are. But we also, I should note, have a crippling penalty if you come in without a fish. It's not like public shaming or embarrassment, but it's enough so that you can't just run the course and never fish and then still win.
Interesting. All right. So, let's do the Lake Fork. What's the distance on that one?
10 miles, roughly.
10 miles. And it's an out and back.
Yes. So people see. So as you're going out, if you're really fast, you get to see water first before everyone else. But as soon as you break
Oh.
off and start fishing, people can go past you, and then they see that water first. And so there's a lot of strategy involved. And my dad, actually, who's one of my primary volunteers, he did he interviewed people one year about what their strategy was before the race, and then he interviewed them after what their strategy was, and they totally abandoned their strategy, most of them, once they got out there, because the pressure of deciding where you're going to stop and fish and then fishing it and being like, oh my god, I got to catch a fish quickly, why aren't they biting? And so that's there's a lot of strategy involved, and but it's all fun. We typically, at the turnaround point, we have whiskey, which is optional, obviously, but salmon and cheese, and so people will come and they'll hit the turnaround point and just hang out for a while, and so it's
I caught a
unlike
big fish. I
most
have time.
races I know where people are moving through checkpoints real quick, like they got to get to the finish. And some people do that. Not everyone stops for whiskey and cheese, but it's encouraged.
I love the sound of this. You know what I like about it? I mean, it kind of goes without saying, but it's a community of people getting together, doing something slightly silly but worthwhile and having fun. It's promoting awareness about threatened fish, and it's also promoting being active and being in the outdoors and being able to run 10 miles. Right? I mean, all of these things. It all has such a good vibe to it to me. So
Yeah, and
kudos,
and
man. I
and the
love it.
other my favorite part of it, Kurt, is the community that it creates. It's sitting around at the campfire, assuming there's not a fire ban, and just listening to people talk about the fish they caught, the fish they almost caught.
Right.
At one of our races, the Middle Creek race, the Rio Grande cutthroat trout is on course, and so they're talking about, I almost caught a Rio Grande cutty and all this, and so and then on social media, you see a lot of people that meet at these things. They're going out and fishing together outside of the race, and that's really, I think, getting a bunch of like-minded people together in the woods, away from their phones, away from the news cycle, is also super important in this day and
Mm,
age.
yeah. Well said. I saw on your website. I don't remember what you called it. Something slapping, like fish slapping, or what is this?
Yeah. So back to the flyathlon ecosystem. So both Fishslapping and fastest known fish are non-race engagement opportunities for people to engage in flyathlon like behavior. And So fish lapping is simply if you're running a race, someone else's race that's near a fishable body of water, you just run the race with a fly rod or a fishing rod and stop and catch a fish during their race and then take a picture on their race bib and send it to me. And I've encouraged people to let the other, as a race director, I've encouraged people to let the race director know that they're going to do this, and if they object, then to not do it. But most race directors are like, "You want to do what? Sure, go ahead." But that's a lot of fun. I've done it a number of times, and when people in the race see you running with the fly rod on their back, on your back, they're like, "What? What's going on here?" It's another opportunity to educate. And then fastest known fish for your listeners who are familiar with fastest known time, which is like an ultra running thing, where you go to a trailhead. It's the fastest time known to the top of a notable peak or whatnot.
Yeah.
We just add fish and beer to that. And so we've got a website that we've developed that has a bunch of different routes. And most routes people haven't gone back to, at least not competitively. But it's an opportunity to document your effort on a particular run, and then also share that with folks so they say, oh, if I'm in this area, I might try that to beat your time, or just to get out there and they know what's in the lake based on the report from the person who set the course. So those are two of the non-race engagements. And then we have the long distance side of things, which is the series of Troutman challenges. And those were born out of the fact that I don't get to run my own races because I'm in the throes of like making sure people aren't overheating, or that they're not getting lost in the woods. So the Troutman, which is a marathon, 4 different species of fish, gaining 3,000 feet or more, and a 12% beer, or alternatively awesome alternative. So you can not drink a 12% beer and still become a trout man or trout woman. But you have to do that in 12 hours. And then we have belt buckles for those folks that are able to complete that. And then we've kind of built on that over the years. I've got one friend in particular who he's an actual ultra runner. I'm just a wannabe ultra runner. So as he's hit each of these levels, he's asked for more. And so I've had to create more. And so we have Old Trout, which is 50 miles, 5 fish. We have Lucifish, which is 66.6 miles, 6 fish. And then most recently, the challenge I threw at him was called Finsanity, which is 10 fish, 100 miles, gaining 10,000 feet, and a 20% beer in 48 hours. And he and another friend of mine accomplished that in June. And
wow.
It was insane.
Where do you even find a 20% beer, Andrew?
Well, another reasonable question is, where do you find 10 fish species and 10,000 feet again? But
Right.
20% beers are few and far between, but I've got a secret source. And so
It's like a triple
I have
lock or
a
something.
fridge full of, I have a fridge full of high ABV beers that I will send to folks who are dumb enough to take these on. But I myself have completed up to, it's a progressive series. So you have to be a trout man before you can attempt the 50-mile version and up the chain. And so I've only made it through the 66.6 mile challenge. And so Finsanity is on my long-term to-do list.
Finsanity, that sounds rough. 100 miles, 10,000 verts, 10 species of fish, 20% beer.
48 hours. Yeah. And
in 48 hours.
And which my ultra running buddy did in, I want to say 29, 31 hours, something around there. I'm going to take every last minute of those 48 hours to get, to get through it. And it's challenging, right? Because you're you can't really fish when it's 2 in the morning. So you've got a
Right.
time where you're going to be, uh, to find 10 different species, you got to cover a lot of different water bodies. And so you got to, it's more planning than anything. Yes, you've still got to run 100 miles, but you need to be at the right places at the right times to be successful. And so, poring over maps and intel from Parks and Wildlife, what fish is where, and then hitting it not in the middle of the day when it's too hot to fish. It's a logistical nightmare, but they got it done.
That's amazing. Andrew, I've interviewed several ultramarathoners, and just the story of I ran 100 miles and this is what it felt like. Just that story is amazing. I mean,
Yeah.
people that do this stuff, and I don't run that far. People that do this stuff are super athletes and what they've accomplished. But then to throw in the fun angle, it's not just it's not just hard work. I'm going to catch 10 different species of fish while I'm doing this. I mean,
It's fun.
that's wild.
It's a lot of fun, but I would caution folks. There's an element of panic too. If you're at a location where this is the only opportunity you have to catch the species that you need, panic starts to set in when they're not eating. Uh, and you do just have to remember it's for fun. But when you're 47 miles in and a grayling won't eat, it can be pretty frustrating.
Wow. I had never heard of this before looking into what you're doing here. And I think that it's a beautiful juxtaposition of the things that adventure sports should really be about. It's the fun, the athleticism, the community, the camaraderie, and connecting with nature in unique ways. Beautiful. Well done. Very, very cool
Well, the
stuff.
only the only thing I would add to that, Kurt, is I feel like we as people who get out on these landscapes, yes, we pay taxes. Yes, those taxes should go to the maintenance of those places, but we can do so much more as users of these
Yeah.
public lands and public waters to make sure that they're in good health into the future. And it's really going to require, that investment in whether it's advocacy or through fundraising like our fly athletes do to make sure the resources are there to keep these things in the shape that they're in. Because, as a trail runner, I can show up at any trail and just run it for free. But should I be more engaged in ensuring that trail is going to be runnable for the next 30 years? That's kind of where I'm at in my life is how can I make sure all of this is still around for my kids and their kids, well into the future.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. There are an awful lot of adventure sports that are kind of water based. And I like the idea of combining those with the health of the ecosystem and the watershed. And you found a great way to
Yeah.
do it because the fish are an indicator of the health of the ecosystem, right? So there's even a stronger draw. But I'm thinking about people that are doing whitewater paddling sports or canoeing distance sports or distance kayaking challenges, or the list just goes on and on and on. It's the people that do the fishing, it's the people that do the scuba diving even, and you know having an awareness of what this is all about helps so much, and that's what you're talking about, getting people out there so they have a connection to these native waterways. Cool.
But
Very, very cool.
they've got to be having fun doing it,
Yeah.
because that's gonna make them want to keep doing it, and that'll make them the best advocates and best champions for those places is if they are having a great time while they're doing it.
Yes. You know what? We went this whole show so far without actually explaining to people what fly fishing is. And it's easy to assume that people know, but not everybody does. So will you explain to us how fly fishing is different from other styles of fishing? What makes it unique?
Sure, sure, yeah. It's instead of like spin fishing or bait fishing, you're doing a whole lot more casting, and so you're getting your line off the water and extending the line out with a back cast and then a forward cast. And instead of bait or like a spinning lure, you're imitating the food that the fish is eating in the flies. It's called fly fishing for a reason, but the flies are adult and immature forms of bugs that live in the rivers and the lakes. And so you're imitating the food that the fish is eating naturally and trying to trick them into eating your food, which has a hook on it. And then that's when you bring them in and release them. And so I would say there's a learning curve to fly fishing, but it's not as steep as many people think, as long as you go to the right places where the fish don't see pressure all the time. And so
Yeah.
as a newbie, your fly is not going to be floating quite as well as maybe my fly is after fishing my whole life. But if you go where the fish are desperate, and we don't use the word stupid, we say naive, because they haven't seen a whole lot of fake flies, you're going to be successful, and that's where you learn. And if any of your listeners want a tip on where to go to find naive fish to learn on, have them shoot me an email, and I'd be happy to point them in the right direction. There's a lot of brook trout out there that are willing to eat your terribly presented fly.
And brookies are fun too. And so your
Absolutely.
website is river. Let's see. I said it backwards. Runningrivers.org. Is that the best way to get in touch
Correct.
with you?
Yeah, I think we've got I think my email's up there. If it's not, I'll put it up tonight. I'm a toxicologist, fish ecologist, not a website developer. So if my website is terrible, I'm sorry, listeners, but I'm working on it. But my email's super easy. It's cutthroat at Gmail. So if your listeners want to shoot me an email, I'm happy to point them in the right direction, because it is a wonderful sport, and it's something you can do your whole life. So
Well, I can say this much. I did a lot of fishing in Oklahoma as a kid, and when I tried fly fishing, I was very pleasantly surprised. It is it is just a whole new ball game. And line casting is also fun. I mean, even if all you have on the end of your line is a piece of a cotton ball, just getting that line to float correctly and to make the distance, I mean, it's just a really, really fun thing to learn.
yeah, and it's something you can spend a whole lifetime mastering. I think I'm good until I go fish with my buddy Ben, who's younger than me but is 100 times better than me, and so I learn something from him every time I go out with him. I learned something new from all the people I run around in the woods doing these dumb long distance challenges with. You learn new things every time you go out, as long as you're open to learning. And it's like any sport. I think there are some frustrations, and there are some people that take themselves too seriously. But I think there's it's a wonderful sport to learn, and as long as you're open to that learning, I think it's enjoyable.
I think one of my favorite things about it is where it takes me. You know, it
Yeah.
takes me to pristine waterways, nestled in canyons, into beautiful, beautiful mountainscapes, and you experience all the elements, and you're often standing in the water. I mean, you know, you're dealing with the elements one on one. It's not just a matter of looking out the window of your car. You're there, and
Yep.
there's something about that. Just having a goal, having an activity that will take you to places in nature is so valuable, and that's one of the things I like most about fly fishing. And I'll be candid with you, Andrew. often when my son, who's just crazy about fly fishing, was growing up, um, he's very tenacious, and he can fly fish for a very long time. And so quite often, I'd be done, but he's still going at it. And I had so much fun just sitting on the bank, observing, watching the eagles fly by, you know, looking at the rocks and the the geology. And for me, it's just as much about where I go as it is whether I ever catch a fish or not.
Well, that's the progression of fly fishermen is, you want to catch your first fish, and then you want to catch the most fish, then you want to catch the biggest fish, and then you want to take a nap next to the river because you've caught enough fish, and you just want to listen to the river as you take a nap. Or maybe that's the progression of just aging, and you want to take a nap by the river. But the other thing you jogged in my memory is for listeners. I mean, fly fishing has I think, undeserved reputation of being super expensive to do. I think, if you get kitted out to the extreme, and with waders and a boat and all that, it can be expensive. But at its core, all you need is a rod, a reel, and some flies, and a willingness to stand in cold water from time to time. And so it's not prohibitively expensive, particularly if you're willing to experience nature without a barrier between you and nature, and just stand in the river. It's I think that's the purest way to do it anyway, personally.
I have to share, Andrew, what a guy in a fly shop said to me once when we were looking at rods. He was holding a rod in his hand that was over $700, and I was holding a rod in my hand that was somewhere probably south of 100. And he looked at me and says, "You know what the difference is between those two rods?" I said, No idea. He said, "About 2 to 3 feet of cast." And
Yeah,
the point
yeah,
the point
and I
was
mean,
you can go for the best, but
particular as you're learning, you're not going to know the difference between
no.
the $900 rod and you're more likely to break the rod anyway. So might as well have that $100 rod. But no, I think that's important for folks to know, is that it's not cost prohibitive. Particularly if you're interested, which I've never done because I have fat fingers and I'm not terribly crafty. But I know, tying your own flies is a whole new level of getting into the craft, and can save you some resources in terms of buying flies. But yeah, I think it's a wonderful way to experience the natural world, and would encourage everyone to give it a shot.
Yeah, I agree. And the thing about fly tying is that it's a great wintertime sport.
Yeah. It's like craft beer though, Kurt. So many people do it so well. I'm just gonna screw it up, so I'm gonna let others do it do it for me.
Well, Andrew, thank you so much for being on the Adventure Sports Podcast today. And thank you for sharing what you have going on with your Running Rivers organization. I think it's a really cool idea. And man, I think it's fun. I'm glad that other people out there can learn about your organization. But we have a worldwide reach. Maybe there will be people that want to emulate what you're doing so that they can build awareness about their local rivers and ecosystems too.
Well, that's the great thing, is it's exportable, and we actually do have it's called the High Country Flyathlon. A guy from Australia reached out to me and said, "Can we do this in Australia?" And I said, "I don't know. Do you have the time?" And he's been putting them on for the last couple years. But it could be done anywhere. It doesn't have to be a trout stream. We've looked at Arkansas for smallmouth bass. So if anyone is interested in exploring the development wherever you are in the world, feel free to reach out, because I'm happy to share all the ways I've messed it up, so that you don't do that as you develop yours.
Okay, and people can reach you at runningrivers.org and cutthroat@gmail.com.
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right, Andrew. Well, thank you very much. And all the listeners out there, thank you for your time today. We don't talk a lot about fishing on the Adventure Sports Podcast, but it is a fantastic adventure sport. And so until the next show, find your fun. And if that is one of these flyathlons, then more power to you. Take care.
Thanks, Kurt.